The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., April 30th, 2026. I hereby designate the period from Thursday, April 30th, 2026, through Monday, May 11th, 2026, as a district work period under Clause 13 of Rule 1. Signed sincerely, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule 1, the House stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. on Monday next.
Hey everyone, Dr. John here. This is what just happened today. The Speaker of the House is in full-blown panic, not from Democratic opposition, but from his own Republican members who put him in the chair. Their message is growing louder by the hour. They want him gone, immediately, and they're not waiting for an election to solve it. The chaos consuming the House Republican Conference has reached a level that is difficult to overstate and nearly impossible to fully capture unless you are watching it unfold in real time, which, as it happens, we are. Members of the majority party, the party that controls the gavels and sets the agenda and theoretically holds all the cards, are now openly telling reporters that they wish they were back in the minority. Think about what that means.
32 days into the government shutdown, and 2 congressional Republicans have emerged as the biggest critics of their own party's handling of it. One of them is California Congressman Kevin Kiley, who has been urging Speaker Johnson to call lawmakers back to Washington. The other, I'm sure you're familiar with.
I'm deeply angry. I'm deeply disappointed. I'm actually to a level of pure disgust that we are wasting the opportunity that we have and not solving the problems. I'm so angry at my own party, and I'm angry at all the men in leadership in the House and the Senate. And I'm like, you guys are weak and pathetic.
These are politicians who fought tooth and nail to win their seats, who raised millions of dollars and spent endless hours campaigning and made endless promises to voters. And now that they have achieved what they supposedly wanted, they are confessing, sometimes on the record, sometimes in whispered asides that get leaked anyway, that being led by Speaker Mike Johnson and former President Donald Trump is such a chaotic, dysfunctional, personally damaging experience that they would genuinely prefer to lose. This is not a normal level of political discontent. This is the kind of soul-deep exhaustion that sets in when every day brings a new self-inflicted wound, when the leadership you are supposed to trust keeps steering the ship into icebergs, when the voters back home are asking why nothing is getting done, and you do not have a good answer, because honestly, there is no good answer.
The reason I asked for the gentleman to yield to me is precisely the response we just heard. You know what really the problem is? People want to get home to fundraisers. People want to get home to dinners. People want to go back to their districts and go on trips. They have Codels. Meanwhile, the American people are wondering what on earth is happening in this town.
The gentleman will suspend. House will be in order. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. The American people are wondering what on earth is happening when they look at this body and see what we failed to do. We're continuing every single day to drive this entire country into bankruptcy. $40 trillion, government spying on the people. Failure to stop government spying on the people. Kill switches in cars. Failure to stop sugar drinks going to children on the SNAP program voted by both sides of the aisle. And we go home and the American people say, what are you doing? Well, here we sit. And the response here is, please let us get on our flights so we can go home. Be away for 10 days while this country suffers because this body doesn't do its job.
The MAGA Republicans who populate the House conference, the very people who are supposed to be the most loyal foot soldiers of the movement, are wandering the hallways of the Capitol and telling anyone who will listen that this situation is unsustainable. They are miserable. They are frustrated. They are looking toward the midterm elections not with hope, but with a kind of grim resignation. And some of them are actually saying out loud that a Democratic majority might be the best thing that could happen to them, because at least then they could go back to throwing rhetorical grenades trades from the cheap seats instead of being responsible for the actual governance that they are proving spectacularly incapable of delivering. The outlet known as Notice recently published a piece that should be required reading for anyone trying to understand the current state of the Republican Party. The headline alone captures the mood. It frames the situation as Mike Johnson's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week. And the article inside is a catalog of grievances so extensive that it reads less like political reporting and more like a therapeutic venting session. House Republicans, the piece explains, are absolutely miserable, and they are laying the blame squarely at the feet of their speaker. The chaos generated by a razor-thin majority has some members actively wishing for the minority, and one House Republican is quoted directly saying that losing the majority now would be a blessing in disguise. The logic, such as it is, goes something like this. If Democrats take over, they will inevitably overreach. They will do something stupid because that is what majorities do, and perhaps, just perhaps, voters would give Republicans another chance down the line, maybe in the 2028 cycle. This is not a strategy for winning. This is a coping mechanism, a rationalization for failure dressed up as a long-term play. Another senior Republican speaking to the same outlet offered a quote that will likely haunt Mike Johnson for the remainder of his speakership, however long or short that remainder turns out to be. This is what happens, the senior member said, when you have a leadership who cannot organize a one-car parade. That line is devastating because it is so perfectly calibrated. A one-car parade is the simplest possible organizational challenge. You have one vehicle. You point it in a direction, you tell it to go. And according to this Republican, Mike Johnson cannot even manage that. The conference is adrift, the agenda is a mess, and the person at the top is being blamed for all of it. Then there is Congressman Chip Roy, a MAGA-aligned firebrand from Texas, who has never been shy about expressing his displeasure. Roy went on the record with an assessment that was blunt even by his standards. Right now, he said, it is a show. Not a functioning legislative body, not a serious governing coalition, just a show, a performance, a piece of political theater with no substance underneath. And then another MAGA Republican, speaking with the kind of candor that usually requires anonymity, put it even more directly. We are effed right now. That word, the one that gets bleeped on television, is apparently the most accurate description available for the state of the House Republican Conference. So what does Speaker Mike Johnson do when confronted with a caucus in open rebellion, members trashing him to reporters, and a legislative agenda that is going nowhere? He calls a recess. He sends everyone home. He shuts down the House of Representatives for 2 full weeks, dispatching every member back to their districts through May 11th, as if the solution to an ungovernable conference is to simply stop governing entirely. The moment on the House floor was captured and has been circulating widely. Johnson passes a note to the House clerk, the procedural equivalent of tapping out, and just like that, the people's representatives are sent on an extended vacation while the people's business goes unattended. This Congress, under this leadership, has developed a distinct pattern. It does not work. It does not legislate in any meaningful sense. It convenes, it performs, it generates headlines, and then it recesses, leaving behind whatever mess it created and hoping nobody notices. The only thing this Congress seems capable of doing with any consistency is inflicting pain on the American people, whether through shutdown threats, benefit disruptions, or the general atmosphere of chaos that makes it impossible for anyone to plan or feel secure. And now, with the latest recess, even the pretense of work has been abandoned. Before the recess was called, the House did manage to push through some legislation. And examining what was passed reveals a great deal about why the conference is in such disarray. Consider the Department of Homeland Security funding saga. For months, Mike Johnson had been insisting that he would never, under any circumstances, accept a compromise that funded the Department of Homeland Security without also funding immigration and customs enforcement. The Senate had reached a deal, a compromise that Democrats and some Republicans could support, but Johnson drew a hard line. No ICE funding, no DHS funding. That was the position, stated repeatedly and emphatically. Then, just before sending Congress into recess, Johnson reversed himself. He agreed to fund DHS without dealing with ICE, kicking the ICE question down the road to some future reconciliation process that may or may not ever materialize. The very compromise he had spent months attacking as unacceptable suddenly became acceptable. The shutdown of DHS that he had engineered, with all the attendant chaos and uncertainty, turned out to be entirely unnecessary because he ultimately did exactly what the Democrats and the Senate had proposed all along. Members who had taken hard votes and defended the leadership's position back home were left looking foolish, and they were not happy about it. Then there is the FISA Section 702 reauthorization, a surveillance authority that allows warrantless spying under certain circumstances. Donald Trump had campaigned against this, had insisted that warrants were necessary, had positioned himself as a defender of civil liberties against the surveillance state. So naturally, Mike Johnson pushed through a reauthorization of the warrantless program, directly contradicting the stated position of the party's leader. How did he manage to get enough MAGA Republicans to go along with this betrayal of their own stated principles? The answer, according to multiple accounts, is that he tricked them. Johnson allegedly promised to support a bill banning central bank digital currency, a major priority for certain members of the MAGA caucus, in exchange for their votes on FISA. The deal was struck, the votes were delivered, and then, once the FISA bill was safely passed, Johnson withdrew the central bank digital currency ban. He simply pulled it. The members who had made the deal were left holding the bag, having cast a vote that would infuriate their base in exchange for a promise that evaporated the moment it was no longer needed. Being played for fools by your own leadership is not the kind of thing that builds conference loyalty. The Farm Bill added yet another layer of dysfunction to the pile. This deeply unpopular piece of legislation originally contained a provision that would grant blanket immunity to manufacturers of certain herbicides and pesticides, most notably glyphosate, a chemical that has been linked to cancer. MAGA Republican Congress members like Anna Paulina Luna and Thomas Massie, joined by a number of Democrats, had to fight to introduce amendments stripping out this immunity provision. The process forced dozens of Republicans to take votes that could be characterized as supporting glyphosate, supporting pesticide companies, supporting carcinogens. The immunity language was ultimately removed, but not before the damage was done. Vulnerable Republicans had been forced to cast votes that their opponents would use against them in campaign advertisements for years to come, and they were furious at the Speaker for putting them in that position. Exposing members to politically toxic votes for no good reason is not a leadership strategy, it is malpractice. Before the recess gavel came down, Congressman Joe Neguse, a Democrat, was seen on the House floor cross-examining one of the MAGA Republicans who had been championing the pro-glyphosate position. It was a brutal exchange, the kind of moment that gets clipped and shared and turned into opposition research. The optics were terrible, and the members who endured those exchanges knew exactly whose fault it was. The spectacle continued outside the chamber as well. The team from TMZ caught up with MAGA Republican Congressman Dan Muser as Congress was fleeing town for its extended recess, and the encounter was revealing. Muser was visibly triggered, agitated, defensive, the body language of a man who knows things are falling apart and does not want to answer questions about it was unmistakable. When members of Congress cannot handle casual questions from entertainment reporters without losing their composure, you know the pressure inside the conference must be unbearable. And what was Mike Johnson saying as he called this recess, as he sent the House into hibernation while his members were in open revolt? It was, by all accounts, fairly pathetic. Johnson attempted to frame the situation as one where the MAGA Republicans were the grown-ups in charge, the responsible stewards, keeping the government functional while chaos swirled around them. This framing is difficult to square with the reality of a speaker who just shut down the House because he could not manage his own caucus. Being the grown-up in the room typically does not involve fleeing the room entirely. Before the recess was formally called, Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern took to the House floor and delivered a blistering critique of the Farm Bill process, laying out exactly how the MAGA Republican leadership had botched the legislation and exposed their own members to completely avoidable political damage. It was the kind of speech that would have stung under normal circumstances, but delivered to a conference already in open rebellion against its speaker, it landed like a series of hammer blows, even on state-aligned media outlets. The kind of programming that normally serves as a safe space for Republican leadership. Guests were openly criticizing Trump and Johnson. The talking points were not holding. The spin was not working. When friendly media starts questioning your competence, the foundation is crumbling beneath your feet. So why did Johnson call this recess now, at this moment when the chaos was peaking and the criticism was loudest? Observers on the Hill have a theory, and it has nothing to do with giving members a rest. The MAGA Republicans, during this recess, are planning to explore whether there are additional states where they can gerrymander districts, redraw maps, and rig the electoral landscape to pick up House seats in the midterms. It is an admission that they cannot win on the merits, cannot win on their record, cannot win by persuading voters. Their only path, as they see it, is to change the rules of the game so fundamentally that the voters' preferences become secondary to the mapmakers' designs. And so they are running to state-level allies to get that process started. The most prominent example comes from Florida, where Ron DeSantis has been approached about gerrymandering the state's maps to benefit Republicans. DeSantis, never one to shy away from a fight, responded with a performance that was part tough guy bravado and part bizarre mimicry. He adopted a strange voice to mock Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, and delivered what he apparently believed was a Clint Eastwood-style ultimatum. "We are going to do maximum warfare against Republicans," he said, imitating what he claimed Democrats were threatening. "You mess around, you are going to find out." Then, slipping into his own voice, DeSantis claimed he had told Democrats to go ahead and make his day. He challenged them to come down to Florida, spend their money, roll the dice, and take their chances. But, he warned, do not think that threats would make Florida Republicans flinch. According to DeSantis, the strategy worked. The Florida legislature, he said, turned around and passed a new map. The bravado may play well in certain circles, but the underlying reality is grim. The Republican strategy for holding the House is not to govern well and earn the trust of voters. It is to redraw the lines so that even if voters prefer Democrats, Republicans keep their seats. That is not democracy. That is rigging the system. And they are doing it openly during a recess called because the Speaker cannot manage his own conference. Meanwhile, Anna Paulina Luna, one of the MAGA Republicans caught in the pesticide blowback, took to social media to address the discontent among her colleagues. She wrote that she was hearing some members were upset about the backlash they were receiving from constituents for voting against the amendment to remove pesticide liability protections. She made it clear that she had nothing to do with that backlash. She did not control activists, influencers, outside groups, or anyone else. And she suggested that blaming outside forces for constituent anger was a pretty significant cop-out. People, she wrote, were genuinely upset that the provision had been added to the Farm Bill and that it would have given liability protection to pesticide companies. That is called accountability, and it is what happens when members vote for things their constituents hate. Finally, there is the matter of the Epstein files, a subject that continues to haunt the MAGA Republican leadership. Many MAGA Republicans are deeply unhappy with how Mike Johnson has handled the situation, and they believe he has completely botched what they see as a cover-up. The sequence of events is convoluted but significant. Pam Bondi dodged a subpoena requiring her to appear at a deposition several weeks ago. Democrats kept up the pressure, kept calling her out, kept demanding she testify, and now Bondi's deposition is scheduled for late May. The issue is not going away. If anything, Americans are more focused on the Epstein files than before, precisely because the MAGA leadership's attempts to suppress the story have been so ham-fisted and transparent. Now Bondi is going to testify, and the obvious question is being asked more loudly than ever. If these MAGA Republicans were trying so hard to prevent her testimony, what else are they hiding? The cover-up, the very thing that was supposed to make the story disappear, has instead amplified it. And other MAGA Republicans, watching their leadership stumble from one self-inflicted disaster to another, are concluding that the people in charge are handling everything in the worst possible way. They want Johnson gone, and the Epstein fiasco is just one more reason on a very long list. The situation inside the House Republican Conference is, by any objective measure, a complete collapse of functional leadership. The Speaker is calling recesses because he cannot pass legislation. Members are openly wishing for electoral defeat. Senior figures are mocking the leadership's competence. Deals are being made and broken, members are being tricked into toxic votes, and the only apparent strategy for holding power is to gerrymander districts so aggressively that voters no longer matter. The American people deserve a Congress that works, that legislates, that solves problems. What they are getting instead is a vacationing, dysfunctional, self-destructive majority that cannot organize a one-car parade and has apparently decided that the best way to handle its problems is to simply stop showing up for work. Mike Johnson may have bought himself 2 weeks of quiet with this recess, but the members who are coming for his job are not going away. They are going home, talking to their constituents, hearing the anger and frustration, and coming back even more determined to find a speaker who can actually lead. The clock is ticking, and the chaos is far from over.